What you're about to witness is one of the most explosive political confrontations in recent Canadian history. Alberta Premier Danielle Smith walked into what she thought would be a routine town hall about coal mining policy, but instead found herself facing an absolute political firestorm that lasted over 2.5 hours. This wasn't just heckling or polite disagreement. This was a premier getting absolutely torn apart by her own constituents, with moments so uncomfortable they'll make you cringe. The tension was so thick you could cut it with a knife, and Smith's reactions? Let's just say they revealed more about her leadership style than any prepared speech ever could. By the end of this video, you'll understand why political experts are calling this a potential career-defining moment for one of Canada's most controversial premiers. Before we dive into this political train wreck, make sure you hit that subscribe button and give this video a thumbs up. Trust me, you're going to want to see how this unfolds. Also, drop a comment below and let me know what you think about Smith's handling of this situation, because the reactions from political analysts across the country have been absolutely wild. Let's set the scene here. Fort Macleod, Alberta, Wednesday. Night, June 11th, 2025. A small community hall packed with about 500 people, and these aren't your typical political gathering attendees. We're talking cowboy hats, belt buckles, jeans, real Alberta folks who aren't afraid to speak their minds. Smith arrived with 3 of her cabinet ministers, thinking they'd have a controlled discussion about the province's coal mining policies. What they got instead was a masterclass in how quickly a political event can spiral completely out of control. The atmosphere was charged from the moment Smith walked in. You have to understand the context here. Alberta has been dealing with massive controversy around coal mining in the Rocky Mountain foothills, particularly around the infamous Grassy Mountain Coal Project. Local communities have been fighting these developments for years, worried about water contamination, environmental destruction, and the impact on their agricultural way of life. These aren't environmental activists from the city. These are ranchers, farmers, and small business owners whose livelihoods depend on clean water and healthy land. What makes this situation even more explosive is Smith's track record. She's already been under fire for a series of controversial statements and policy decisions. We're talking about a premier who has claimed unproven Indigenous heritage, who said unvaccinated people face more discrimination than any other group, and who has consistently pushed policies that many Albertans see as extreme. So when she walked into that town hall, she wasn't just dealing with coal mining concerns. She was facing years of accumulated frustration and anger. The first sign that this wasn't going to be a typical political event came immediately. Before Smith even started her formal presentation, protesters were already heckling her during her media scrum outside the hall. The tension was palpable, and you could see it in her body language. She was already on the defensive, and the main event hadn't even started yet. Once inside, things escalated rapidly. Smith attempted to give her standard presentation about the government's coal policy framework, but she was constantly interrupted by shouts from the audience. This wasn't polite political discourse. People were angry, and they weren't hiding. The competing applause and jeers created an atmosphere that political veterans describe as unlike anything they've seen in recent Canadian politics. What's particularly telling is how Smith responded to the pressure. Instead of trying to de-escalate or acknowledge the genuine concerns being raised, she often became defensive and dismissive. There were moments where her frustration was clearly visible, where you could see her struggling to maintain her composure. This is crucial because it reveals something fundamental about her leadership style under pressure. One of the most damaging moments came when former Lethbridge Mayor Chris Spearman directly challenged Smith. He didn't mince words, asking her to commit to holding a referendum on coal mining in Alberta, just like she had committed to separatist movements. The way Smith handled this question was revealing. Instead of giving a straight answer, she deflected and gave a politician's non-answer that only further inflamed the crowd. The optics were absolutely terrible for Smith. Here you have a premier who campaigned on being different from the political establishment, on being a straight talker who would represent ordinary Albertans. But when faced with a room full of ordinary Albertans expressing their genuine concerns, she came across as defensive, out of touch, and unwilling to truly listen. The contrast between her public persona and her performance under pressure was stark. What made this even more embarrassing for Smith was the duration of the event. This wasn't a quick confrontation that she could brush off. This went on for over 2.5 hours. The original plan was for a 2-hour event, but Smith actually asked to extend it by another 30 minutes to take more questions. In retrospect, this was probably a mistake because it gave more time for the situation to deteriorate and for more uncomfortable moments to unfold. The policy implications of this town hall are significant. Coal mining in Alberta isn't just an environmental issue, it's about water security, agricultural sustainability, and the kind of future the province wants to build. The people in that room weren't abstract policy concerns. They were real Albertans, whose lives would be directly affected by these decisions. Smith's inability to effectively address their concerns raises serious questions about her government's consultation processes and their commitment to listening to affected communities. From a political analysis perspective, this town hall represents a perfect storm of factors that can destroy a politician's credibility. You have genuine grassroots anger, a controversial policy issue, a leader who appeared unprepared for the level of opposition, and the kind of authentic, unfiltered political moment that can't be spin-doctored away. These are the moments that define political careers, and not usually in a good way. The media coverage of this event has been brutal for Smith. Outlets across Canada have picked up the story, and the narrative is consistently negative. Headlines like "Premier Smith faces raucous angry town hall" and "Danielle Smith heckled by raucous crowd" don't just report the facts, they paint a picture of a leader losing control of the room and, by extension, potentially losing control of her political mandate. What's particularly damaging is how this fits into the broader narrative about Smith's leadership. This isn't an isolated incident. It's part of a pattern of controversial moments and questionable decisions that have plagued her tenure as premier. Political observers are already connecting this town hall to her previous gaffes and controversies, creating a compound effect that's much more damaging than any single incident would be on its own. The strategic implications for Smith's political future are significant. Alberta politics can be unforgiving, and premiers who lose the confidence of their rural base often don't survive long. These are traditionally conservative voters who should be Smith's natural allies, but the anger and frustration displayed at this town hall suggests that support is far from guaranteed. Looking at Smith's body language and responses throughout the evening, you can see moments where her political instincts failed her. Good politicians know how to read a room and adjust their approach accordingly. They know when to acknowledge criticism, when to show empathy, and when to demonstrate that they're actually listening. Smith's performance suggested someone who was more focused on defending her position than on understanding the genuine concerns being raised. The policy details matter here too. The coal mining issue isn't going away, and Smith's government will have to make concrete decisions that will affect thousands of Albertans. This town hall demonstrated that there's significant grassroots opposition to expanded coal mining, but it also showed that Smith may not be the leader to navigate this complex issue effectively. What makes this situation even more politically damaging is the authenticity of the opposition. These weren't paid protesters or political operatives. These were real Alberta families worried about their water supply, their land, and their future. When a politician loses credibility with their natural base, it creates a political vulnerability that opponents will certainly exploit. The aftermath of this town hall will likely be just as important as the event itself. How Smith responds in the coming days and weeks will determine whether this becomes a defining moment of weakness or whether she can somehow turn it into a demonstration of resilience. Based on her track record and her performance at the town hall, the smart money is on this becoming a lasting political liability. From a broader perspective, this town hall represents something significant about the current state of Canadian politics. Voters are increasingly frustrated with leaders who seem disconnected from their daily realities and concerns. Smith's performance demonstrated exactly the kind of political tone deafness that can destroy careers in today's political environment. The technical aspects of political communication were also on full display here. Smith's inability to effectively manage a hostile room, to de-escalate tension, or to find common ground with her critics showed fundamental weaknesses in her political skill set. These are the kinds of abilities that separate successful political leaders from those who flame out spectacularly. This isn't just about one bad night or one difficult town hall. This is about a pattern of behavior and decision-making. that raises fundamental questions about Smith's suitability for the Premier's office. When you combine this performance with her previous controversies and questionable statements, you start to see a picture of a leader who may be fundamentally unsuited for the demands of high-level political office. The lasting impact of this town hall will depend partly on how it's remembered and discussed in Alberta political circles. If it becomes part of the standard narrative about Smith's leadership failures, it could haunt her for the remainder of her political career. These are the moments that get referenced in attack ads, brought up in debates, and used to question a leader's competence and judgment. But let's dig deeper into what this really means for Alberta's political landscape. The coal mining controversy isn't just about environmental policy, it's about a fundamental clash between Alberta's traditional resource extraction economy and growing concerns about sustainability and water security. Smith positioned herself as someone who understood rural Alberta values, but this town hall exposed a massive disconnect between her rhetoric and the reality of what many rural Albertans actually want. The demographic breakdown of the opposition is particularly telling. These weren't urban environmentalists or left-wing activists. These were ranchers, farmers, and small business owners who form the traditional backbone of conservative support in Alberta. When you lose that base, you're in serious political trouble. The fact that Smith couldn't find a way to connect with these voters, couldn't speak their language or acknowledge their legitimate concerns, suggests a fundamental misunderstanding of her own political coalition. What makes this even more damaging is the contrast with other successful Alberta premiers. Take Ralph Klein, for example. Love him or hate him, Klein had an uncanny ability to connect with ordinary Albertans, to make them feel heard and understood even when he was delivering difficult messages. Smith's performance showed none of that political instinct. Instead of Klein's folksy charm and ability to diffuse tension, we saw defensiveness, dismissiveness, and a politician who seemed more interested in protecting her position than in genuinely engaging with citizen concerns. The tactical mistakes Smith made throughout the evening compound the strategic damage. Her decision to extend the town hall by 30 minutes was particularly ill-advised. Any experienced politician would have recognized that the room was hostile and that prolonging the event would only create more opportunities for embarrassing moments. The fact that Smith made this choice suggests either poor political judgment or advisors who failed to read the room properly. The media management aspect of this disaster cannot be understated. In today's political environment, these events live forever on social media and video platforms. Clips of Smith looking uncomfortable, defensive, or dismissive will be circulated by her opponents for years to come. The visual narrative of a premier losing control of a room full of her own constituents is political gold for opposition parties and devastating for Smith's brand as a strong leader. From a policy perspective, this town hall revealed the depths of Smith's coal mining problem. The technical details matter here. The areas being considered for coal mining include some of Alberta's most pristine watersheds, regions that supply drinking water to millions of people and irrigation water for thousands of farms. The economic arguments for coal mining pale in comparison to the potential environmental and agricultural costs, and Smith's inability to articulate a compelling case for her position left her looking either uninformed or indifferent to legitimate concerns. The comparison to other recent political disasters is instructive. Think about Justin Trudeau's various scandals or Jason Kenney's failed leadership. These were largely about policy disagreements or personal conduct. Smith's town hall disaster is different because it reveals fundamental incompetence in basic political skills. It's one thing to have controversial policies, it's another thing entirely to be unable to defend those policies in front of your own supporters. The ripple effects of this town hall are already being felt throughout Alberta's political establishment. Conservative MPs and MLAs are reportedly concerned about being associated with Smith's increasingly toxic brand. Internal party dynamics are shifting as ambitious politicians begin to calculate whether their futures are better served by distancing themselves from the premier. This kind of internal party turmoil often precedes leadership challenges and political collapses. What's particularly devastating is how this town hall undermines Smith's core political narrative. She came to power promising to be different from typical politicians, to be a straight-talker who would stand up for ordinary Albertans against out-of-touch elites. But the optics of this event tell a completely different story. Here was a premier who couldn't handle basic questions from her own constituents, who seemed more interested in political spin than genuine dialogue. The historical context makes this even more significant. Alberta has a long tradition of powerful, charismatic premiers who dominated the political landscape for decades. Peter Lougheed, Don Getty, Ralph Klein, and even Jason Kenney in his early days, these were politicians who, regardless of their policies, commanded respect and could work a room effectively. Smith's performance suggests she lacks the fundamental political skills that successful Alberta premiers have traditionally possessed. The international implications shouldn't be ignored either. Alberta's reputation as a stable, business-friendly jurisdiction depends partly on having competent political leadership. When investors and international partners see footage of a premier being shouted down by her own constituents over basic policy questions, it raises concerns about political stability and decision-making competence. These perceptions can have real economic consequences for the province. Looking ahead, Smith faces a series of difficult choices. She can double down on her current approach and risk further confrontations with increasingly frustrated constituents. She can attempt to pivot and moderate her positions, but that risks looking weak and indecisive. Or she can try to avoid similar public forums entirely, but that creates its own political problems and reinforces narratives about being out of touch. The strategic communications challenge is enormous. How do you recover from footage of yourself being thoroughly dominated by angry constituents? How do you rebuild credibility with voters who have seen you at your most vulnerable and ineffective? These are the kinds of political challenges that end careers, and Smith's team has shown little evidence of having the skills necessary to navigate this crisis effectively. What we witnessed in Fort Macleod wasn't just a difficult political moment. It was a window into the soul of Alberta politics and the deep frustrations that exist between political leaders and the people they're supposed to represent. Smith's failure to effectively bridge that gap, to show genuine empathy and understanding, represents a fundamental failure of political leadership that will likely have consequences far beyond this single evening. This town hall may well be remembered as the moment when Danielle Smith's political career began its irreversible decline, a masterclass in how quickly political fortunes can change when basic competence fails under pressure.